According to prosecutors, this case was cracked open by two very different 911 calls.
Falls City, Washington, is the kind of place people dream about. 25 miles east of Seattle, tucked between dense forest and quiet rivers, it is the kind of town where doors stay unlocked, where children play outside until dark, where neighbors still wave at each other from across the road. No gangs, no drug corners, no history of violence worth mentioning. It is, by every measure, safe, and Mark and Sarah Humeston had built exactly the kind of life that matched it, a home on Lake Alice Road. 5 children, a father who worked as an electrical engineer, a mother who was a registered nurse. They homeschooled their kids, kept to themselves, and by all outward appearances had chosen this peaceful corner of the world deliberately to raise their family away from everything dangerous. They had done everything right. And on the morning of October 21st, 2024, every single one of them was dead, all except one. An 11-year-old girl had climbed out of a bedroom window in the dark, bleeding from her neck and her hand, and ran to the nearest house she could find. And the name she gave as the killer was not a stranger's. It was not someone who had broken in from outside. It was not someone the family had reason to fear. It was the person who had sat across from them at every dinner table. The person who had grown up in the same house, under the same roof, raised by the same 2 people now lying dead on the floor. It was her brother. Welcome to Blood Betrayal Files. In today's case, we're going deep into one of the most disturbing tragedies to come out of the Pacific Northwest, the Humeston family massacre of Falls City, Washington. If this is your first time here, we cover the cases that leave you with more questions than answers. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. Falls City, Washington sits about 25 miles east of Seattle, tucked into the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. It is the kind of place where people move specifically to get away from the noise of the city. Dense forest, river crossings, quiet roads, neighbors who wave at each other but mostly keep to themselves. On Lake Alice Road, there was a home that looked, from the outside, like any other house in the area. A family lived there, 2 parents, 5 children, a house surrounded by trees, set back from the road, blending seamlessly into the landscape. The father was Mark Humeston, 43 years old, an electrical engineer. The mother was Sarah Humeston, 42, a registered nurse. Together, they had built a life far from the bustle of the city, raising 5 children on that quiet stretch of road. Their children were 15, 11, 13, 9, and 7 years old. The eldest was a boy. The youngest was a girl named Catherine, who had just turned 7. In between were Benjamin, 13, a daughter of 11, and Joshua, who was 9. Neighbors who were asked about the family after the fact described them as private, very private. The children were homeschooled and rarely seen outside the property. The family had limited contact with the surrounding community, and few people could say they truly knew them. Relatives who later spoke to investigators described the home as strict and deeply religious, with what some characterized as survivalist beliefs, an emphasis on self-reliance, isolation from outside influences, and a household structure that left little room for deviation. But none of that was visible from the street. From the road, it was just a house, a quiet house where a family lived. And in the early hours of October 21st, 2024, that house became a crime scene. It was still dark when the first shot was fired. Somewhere inside the home on Lake Alice Road, a weapon had been retrieved. It was a silver Glock handgun, a semi-automatic pistol that belonged to the father, Mark Humeston. The gun had been secured inside a locked storage box, but the storage box had an access code, and someone in that house knew what the code was. The 11-year-old daughter woke up to the sound of gunfire. In those first confused seconds, she did not know what was happening. She got out of bed and moved toward the hallway to find out. What she saw stopped her cold. Her father was lying on the floor. He was bleeding. Nearby, her 9-year-old brother Joshua was also down, badly wounded. The shots had already moved through the house before she had even opened her eyes. Moments later, 7-year-old Catherine heard the noise too. She stepped out of her bedroom into the hallway to see what was going on. Another shot rang out. The little girl collapsed. The surviving sister turned and ran back into her room. She shut herself in, but the door didn't stay closed for long. It opened. Standing in the doorway was her 15-year-old brother. He was holding the gun. He fired at her. The bullet struck her in the neck and in the hand. She fell onto the bed, and in the seconds that followed, she made the decision that would ultimately save her life. She stopped moving. She went completely still and let him believe she was dead. The teenager did not immediately leave. According to what the girl later told investigators, he moved through the house in a methodical way, walking from room to room, checking on the victims, leaning over bodies to confirm they were no longer alive. He came back through her room. She did not move. She did not make a sound. She lay still and waited. Eventually, he left the room, and that was her window. With her brother out of sight, the girl moved. Quietly, through the pain, she made her way to the bedroom window and climbed out into the cold morning air. She was bleeding heavily, her neck, her hand. The ground was dark and unfamiliar beneath her feet, but she ran. She crossed the yard and made it to a neighboring house. When she knocked and the door opened, the neighbor who saw her didn't hesitate. They brought her inside immediately. The girl's words were clear, even through everything she had just survived. "My brother shot my family." That call went out to King County dispatchers. Deputies were alerted and began moving toward Lake Alice Road. But while that call was being processed, a second call came in. This one was placed from inside the Humeston house. And the voice on the line was calm, controlled, and the story it told had nothing to do with what the surviving girl had just described. The 15-year-old identified himself to dispatchers and told them what had happened, at least his version of it. He said his 13-year-old brother, Benjamin, had done this. Benjamin, he claimed, had gone through the house and killed their parents and their siblings. Then Benjamin had turned the gun on himself. The teenager told dispatchers that he had been hiding in the bathroom the whole time, terrified, waiting for the shooting to stop. He even offered an explanation for why Benjamin might have done something like this. He claimed that Benjamin had recently been caught watching pornography and that he had become volatile and violent in the aftermath of that discovery. It was a detailed story, a specific story, and it arrived at dispatch at nearly the exact same moment as the neighbor's call, the one where an 11-year-old girl with gunshot wounds in her neck and hand had named her 15-year-old brother as the shooter. Two completely opposite accounts. When King County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Humeston home around 5 in the morning, they found the 15-year-old outside the house. He was detained. Inside, investigators found 5 bodies: Mark Humeston, Sarah Humeston, Benjamin, 13, Joshua, 9, Catherine, 7, all dead from gunshot wounds. Evidence of shots fired in multiple rooms throughout the home. And there, on the floor, was Benjamin Humeston, 13 years old, with the silver Glock handgun placed in his right hand. At first look, the scene told the story the 15-year-old had called in. A disturbed boy who had killed his family and then himself. But it did not take long for that story to fall apart. Forensic investigators began their analysis of the crime scene almost immediately, and what they found in the evidence surrounding Benjamin's body directly contradicted the suicide narrative. The fatal gunshot wound Benjamin had suffered was not a contact wound. It was not even a close-range wound. The forensic examination determined that the shot had been fired from more than 2 feet away. At that distance, it was physically impossible for Benjamin to have shot himself and then ended up with the gun in his hand. The gun had been placed there, after the fact, by someone who wanted the scene to tell a particular story. Detectives began reconstructing the sequence of events, and the picture that emerged through court documents was deeply disturbing in its deliberateness. Investigators believe that after the shootings, the suspect showered and changed his clothes. He then moved through the home and staged Benjamin's body, positioning the gun in his dead brother's hand to suggest a murder-suicide. Then he called and delivered the false account he had constructed. The surviving sister's account had already undermined the staging before investigators had even entered the house. She had seen him. She had survived a shot to the neck. She had climbed out a window and run barefoot to a neighbor's door, and she had immediately and clearly identified who had pulled the trigger. The suspect was placed under arrest and transporting to juvenile detention. What followed was an investigation into not just what had happened inside that house, but why. In the weeks and months that followed, investigators and prosecutors worked to establish what could have driven a 15-year-old to kill every member of his immediate family. The surviving sister told police that in the period leading up to the killings, her brother had been in significant trouble over failing tests at school. Whether that conflict had escalated into something that felt, to him, catastrophic, whether it was the source of a rage that had been building long before that morning, has not been confirmed as an official motive by prosecutors. The defense has taken a different approach entirely. The suspect's attorneys have argued that the household environment deserves serious examination, that the family's extreme isolation, the strict survivalist belief system, and the tightly controlled structure of life inside that home may have played a role in what happened. They have pointed to the competing accounts, the sisters and the suspects, and argued that forensics may not be as clear-cut as prosecutors maintain. But the prosecution's position has not shifted. They have characterized the killings as premeditated familicide, methodical, deliberate. The staging of the crime scene, they argue, is itself evidence of planning, of someone who had thought ahead and prepared for what came after. The charges filed against the 15-year-old are 5 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, 1 for each member of his family, and 1 count of attempted murder for the shooting of his surviving sister. Because he was 15 years old at the time of the killings, the court must first resolve a critical jurisdictional question. Will he be tried in juvenile court or transferred to adult court? That distinction carries enormous consequences. In juvenile court, the sentences are limited in scope and duration. In adult court, he could face decades or the rest of his natural life in prison. That decision remains pending as the case continues to work its way through the King County court system. For the community of Falls City, the case has not faded quietly. A neighborhood known for its peace woke up one October morning to find that a family of 7 had been reduced to 1 overnight. The surviving girl, 11 years old, shot and alone, had been the only thing standing between her brother and a perfect crime. She had played dead, she had waited, she had climbed out a window, and she had walked to a neighbor's door and told the truth. Investigators have said plainly that her actions that morning, her presence of mind under conditions no child should ever face, are the reason this case moved forward at all. Without her, there would have been no witness. Without her, a staged crime scene and a well-rehearsed phone call might have shaped the entire investigation from the start. She changed all of that. The question the case leaves behind is not a simple one. It is not just about what one teenager did in the pre-dawn darkness of a rural Washington home. It is about what builds inside a person to the point where the people who raised them become targets. What goes unseen inside a closed household? What pressure or belief or fracture or plan can grow to that conclusion without anyone on the outside ever noticing? Cases like this are rare, but when they happen, the silence beforehand always seems, in hindsight, to have been very loud. If you followed this case or have thoughts on what the investigation may have missed, leave them in the comments. Do you think the courts will uncover the full motive before sentencing? And do you believe this should be tried in adult or juvenile court? We cover the cases that don't let you go. If you want more, Subscribe to Blood Betrayal Files. New cases drop regularly, and the next one is already waiting for you.